Hello, Prime Media audiences. This is your host, Ladette Muleta. Welcome to our show today. I'm here with a new guest. His name is Matt Ehret, and he is joining us from Montreal, Canada. He is going to be giving us his background, and I'm going to give him the chance to introduce himself. Matt, welcome to Prime Media. I am really honored that you took the time to join us today. Thank you very much. Please introduce yourself to our audiences and give us a little background about yourself.
Well, it's a great honor to be on, and thank you for inviting me. I myself am I have a few hats that I wear. I'm the director and co-founder, along with my wife, Cynthia Chung, of an organization called the Rising Tide Foundation here in Montreal. It's a nonprofit devoted to intercultural dialogue and exchange, as well as classical educational reforms. I'm a geopolitical analyst, a BRI expert with several media outlets, including Rogue News, Tactical Talk, and my own news agency that I began here in Canada as well, called the Canadian Patriot Review in 2012. I'm a senior fellow with the American University in Moscow as well, sort of serving a similar purpose. And I've written several books on the clash of the two Americas, going through a reevaluation of what are the dynamics shaping the United States from 1776 until the present. With a better, I attempted to try to bring a better appreciation to the idea that there is not just one behemoth USA, but when you look at many of the American presidents who tend to die in office, and there's been about 8 of them who did not live through their terms, we find that there's a certain common thread, a common policy from 1840 to the death of John F. Kennedy, of a certain policy towards engaging in honest discussion and collaboration with other nations around the world, and a use of protectionism, long-term credit, large-scale infrastructure projects internally to uplift the standards of living of its own people, which sort of step on some feet of not so nice political powers. And so that was the purpose of that book series. Yeah, and I've been doing this now for a number of years, and for about a decade. Between 2006 and 2017, I was working with the Schiller Institute, organizing diplomatic conferences and seminars in Ottawa, which is here I am in Canada, to promote policies for bank reform as well as large-scale development with many people in the diplomatic corps in Africa, the global South, as they call it, which is where a lot of my political conscience sort of, I suppose you could say, grew.
So you definitely wear several hats, including, a historian, huh? And so the world is pretty much going through a lot of things right now, whether it's with COVID and, conflicts in many places, struggles, financial, economic struggles, and so forth. What period in history does our current world remind you of, and what are some of your thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. There are several analogs I could say that really strike me. There's none that I could say are exactly the same. Like I don't believe that history exactly repeats, but as someone who I once respected has said, it is the fools who repeat history. And Mark Twain said history doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes. And I think that one of the rhymes that we see to our current world order, which, I mean, we never had nearly 8 billion people on the planet before. This is a new thing. So, and the configuration, the dynamics are obviously unique in many ways, but the danger here living in the transatlantic especially is that we have a lot of parallels to 1923 Germany I think when you look at the vast array of money printing, which has been infused into a overbloated and bankrupt financial system here in the West since 2008, 2009, COVID hasn't helped, obviously, but the printing of money, the creation of unpayable debts on a variety of levels has resulted in a situation where even, many people in the mainstream finally are beginning to speak about the danger of hyperinflation. And that was what struck in Germany when they were forced to pay unpayable Versailles Treaty debts after World War I. And unfortunately, the physical economic productivity of Germany was taken down. Their productive zones, their agricultural lands were taken up. Their trains were dismantled by the victor nation, so they were given no means of producing wealth, but they were told pay the debt, and they had to just simply print money. And that, obviously, people know the stories of how quickly the Reichsmarks, the money of Germany, lost all of its value, and everyone became a billionaire, but people were starving because bread was trillions of dollars. Today it's similar, but it's different at the same time, because we also have something Germany did not have then as well, which is a speculative casino economy, which is highly over leveraged as well. So many of the prices of commodities, of energy, of many things are not tied to any real asset in the world, nothing measurable. It's really, much of it is tied to speculators who have no concern about oil or people or food, but they want to make money. And so they've created derivative markets where they have insured bundled assets of commodities that are securitized on future and spot markets. And it's just created cancerous growth of money, on at least the appearance of money. But underlying it, again, there's no real value, and it is waiting to be the bubbles, like all bubbles, will blow. So we have that factor too, which is very similar to the 1929 period in the United States with Black Tuesday, right? Where many of the overinflated broker call loans that created the economic bubbles, the roaring 20s, casino of easy money, that all blew up when there was a coordinated calling in of the overextended broker call loans. And that was a coordinated effort to put a little needle into the bubble that had been created in the 1920s, which set into motion the destructive years of shock therapy and trauma in the United States, called the Great Depression. So we have that as well. And I think the difference between then and today is, on the one hand, it's bigger today. The bubble is much larger. We have something like $1.2 quadrillion of derivatives, fictitious capital built into the system. The world GDP is about 80 trillion. It's a fraction of that. But ultimately, we also, on a positive side, not to get people to become too depressed, we also have nation states, strong, powerful, intercivilizational nation states, who have also today stood up and said, no, they do not want to go down with this Titanic. And here I'm referring to many of the Eurasian nations of the multipolar alliance, Russia, China being the leading foundation blocks, who have said, no, we don't have to go this way. And we've never had this before, of various cultures of the world saying together, we can create an alternative pathway out of the fire. And they've made many olive branch offers for many Western governments, many people of Africa and South America as well, to join with them in development and creation of a new economic architecture. So far, we've been stubborn and we've said no, but hopefully that could break us out of our tragic cycle.
Great, Matt. I'm probably going to kind of ask you to describe some of the financial wordings, because I think we want to appeal to a larger audience. And as you mentioned, what we are getting ready to discuss is something that people have a lot of questions about, but really do not understand. I want to kind of focus on on Ethiopia, for instance. What are some of the challenges that Ethiopia is facing? I know that Ethiopia is on the news a lot, and whether you have kind of done any research on what's going on in Ethiopia, and if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, it is in the news a lot. You're correct. And if you were to read or watch much of the mainstream news that here we Canadians or Americans or Europeans are exposed to. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, it's not very favorable to the cause of truth. What we do have, and I was just watching on the news how in Washington D.C. last week, there was the announcement of the All Ethiopia Federalists, a conglomerate of various organizations around the Tigray People's Liberation Movement, and the Oromo Liberation Front, who basically got together and they tried to create a hodgepodge of organizations to create an appearance of a unified bloc to essentially threaten the current Ethiopian government of Abiy Ahmed. And this is what we're being fed in our media here a lot, is the idea that these are freedom movements against a tyrannical power which is trying to abuse the authority of the people, which did not respect their rights for elections, and that these people really just want freedom. Now, the fact is, and I don't think I have to tell your audience much of this. I think everyone probably knows this already. But the fact that this press conference happened at the National Press Club in the United States in Washington, D.C., which has a track record of supporting apparent human rights organizations and other NGOs for the purpose of destabilizing targeted countries that are not behaving according to what has become known as the rules-based international order, is the term often bandied about to try to promote democracy. But really, it's really the obedience to a unipolar hegemon, the United States, or the Anglo-American special relationship in this case. This is often overlooked. So this really, this is something which I think has a lot to do with the fact that Ethiopia is a sovereign nation state, which it has been utilizing amongst many of the countries of Africa who have been so deeply abused for so long under neocolonialism over these past decades. Ethiopia has taken a unique stand and said, no, we wish to have a future. We've chosen, and I'm saying we here, I'm a Canadian, but Ethiopia has obviously chosen to break out of the great game and start doing things that it was not allowed to do, or it was not supposed to do, which involves the emission of credit for large-scale infrastructure projects, the creation of bilateral large-scale treaties with China, who is being increasingly seen as a US enemy, to be also targeted for its own disruption and ideally regime change, is how some of these, neoconservative minded geopoliticians look at China. They actually think that they can utilize their assets in Hong Kong or Xinjiang or Tibet or Taiwan as a way to, again, kind of like what they're doing with Ethiopia. They're trying to say these are democracy movements. We have to protect them. We have to give them support. And what actually ends up happening is you have very violent movements that are being used to disrupt China from within. So Ethiopia has essentially decided to develop itself. The Grand Ethiopian Dam, the Renaissance Dam, is a wonderful example of what every country can do if it is properly motivated to develop the needs of its people and its nation to stand on its own 2 feet. And it's something which I think keeps a lot of imperially minded geopoliticians awake at night, because if this is permitted to properly blossom, this could be a driving force. The Grand Dam, the Renaissance Dam, this could be a driving force for a new African Renaissance, not just for Ethiopia, but for all over Africa. I mean, it's the amount of energy that's being created is 6.2 gigawatts. This would go far to create energy independence, and it would create a role model for many other countries to do the same as well. So I think, this is why you have a lot of the targeting of specifically Ethiopia, but all of Africa has been in many ways targeted for destruction.
Thanks, Matt. To give you an insight into the energy problem. I mean, in Ethiopia, for instance, in a week time, we might not have a light in different parts of the city or the country. There are, a big, about 60% or more, if I'm not mistaken, of the population do not have electricity. And I mean, here in Addis, we have water and electric issues. I mean, so that's how much, the development of the dam and the, development in general for Ethiopians is very important. What I don't understand is why is development for Ethiopia or for any other African countries a problem to other developed nations or other, why would that be a problem? I'm looking at it like, wouldn't that make better partnership instead of, don't you rather have friends who are doing better?
You would, right? No, you're speaking like somebody with common sense and morality, which unfortunately some of and many of those in the West who wield much political power are sorely lacking in both of those virtues. I think when you look at the comparison, and this is why in many ways I decided to write my book series to try to get across to Americans even who have lost their own history. They've lost their touch with their own better traditions. And either you have Americans who despise America for the obvious abuses of its power over the past decades, and I cannot blame them for despising America, but they tend to not see anything good in American history. They see it all from the filter of the present abuses, and they cannot see a battle or a clash of light and darkness. They just cannot see it. And then you have also the foolish idiot patriots who will love the American flag regardless of how many Muslims or other people are wiped off the face of the earth in the name of freedom, right? So you have this confused psyche, and it's been made confused for discoverable intentions. It's not just the natural way things unfolded. There has been intentions and agendas managing the zeitgeist for a long time to sever our current world from the fight that has shaped our past. Because when you look at America's more sane moral periods long past, like John F. Kennedy working with Kwame Nkrumah on building the Great Dam in Ghana. That was a wonderful example of the U.S. behaving like the way you just described, right? A reasonable partner and a member of the human family, saying we all need energy, we all need a future that's better for our children than the life we lived as parents. So that was good business. Obviously, having a more productive, educated Ghana that had access to abundant electricity was a boon. It was a very good thing for American business because that means more consumers. It means, better finished goods, higher new discoveries and inventions could be then brought onto the market. It's all very good. And that's how John F. Kennedy was thinking. Franklin Roosevelt had very similar views for greening the African desert. He had programs for taking water that is locked up underneath much of the Sahara and bringing it to the surface with great infrastructure projects. And he wrote about it extensively in the 1940s of his vision for this world of cooperating nation states working on large scale projects, right? And that would be an end of colonialism, which is why Churchill despised Roosevelt's vision. And when Roosevelt died too soon, and when John F. Kennedy died too soon, unfortunately, their enemies in many ways took control of the positions of power in the USA and turned it more into a neo-colonial behemoth, which was more driven by an idea of keeping most of the world as underdeveloped as possible so that their lands could be better exploited. And if that meant giving them money with conditions through the IMF or the World Bank, right, with conditions saying you can have this money, but you can only have it under the condition that you serve these massively high unpayable interest rates, which will always bring you more into debt slavery, that you not use it for the development of your infrastructure. Or let's say you have an African country that, God forbid, wants to have nuclear power. No. You could use it on these types of appropriate technologies, which are very low energy intensive, like let's say solar power farms or something that you can have because it doesn't disrupt your ecosystems. But you cannot do things that will actually bring you into energy or economic independence, because you have a lot of resources under your land, and we need those. We want those for our strategic interests. And that's what Henry Kissinger laid out in his infamous 1974 National Security Study Memorandum 200, which was only declassified in the early 90s, which laid out, I think, Ethiopia, Mexico, many countries, 14 major countries were on his list to be targeted for depopulation and population control, instead of the former US policy, which was still being shaped by an idea of JFK, Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace, which was, let's help poor countries stand on their own 2 feet. Kissinger and the grouping that came in with him in the 1970s said, no, that's the old wisdom. We have to let that go. And the new wisdom is, it's going to be based on a consumer society ethic for the West. So the West will no longer produce for itself like we once did. We'll no longer have manufacturing. We'll just consume. And that'll be a new way of doing things. And all of the industries we're going to export to cheap labor markets, Mexico or China. They will do the production, but they will remain poor and they will stay in a static state forever. So people like Kissinger believed. And then that way you have the poor who will produce, you have the rich who will consume, and the middlemen controlling the financial levers of power in between above nations would be the ones to manage the inputs and outputs, right? They would modulate and control the population from above. Unfortunately for Kissinger, China was thinking on a much longer scale than he was, and Deng Xiaoping played along for a little while, but increasingly, and they had their own fights, and they have their own fights in China. Okay, don't get me wrong. It's not like China has completely repaired itself. It's still recovering from the one China policy, but they have gone further, and they copied for a period many of the technologies from the West, but then they've gone so far that they've mastered what the West had done. And then they began to say, well, we can actually pioneer now. And China is now going into a domain where it is creating things that no Western society has ever done before, with high-speed rail, magnetic levitation, space technology, quantum computing. Everything is being revolutionized. And they're doing it with a new financial system based upon state banking, the way the US used to do it under times of, like I said, Franklin Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln or Alexander Hamilton. America once had the tradition of state banking using protectionism, large-scale infrastructure that would govern the performance of your private sector. Those were things that we used to do in the West, but we've been prevented from learning about this, even letting alone doing it. But China is doing it. They've revived this technique, which was once emblematic of the better USA, which is quite the irony, I must say. So we now have a situation where we have a hope, we have a light at the end of the tunnel, but there are certain people still hanging on to their old delusions, and they don't want Africa to develop. They don't want South America to develop. And they are willing to do everything possible because they want control more than money. They don't want business partners. They want, it's more like a feudal type of romanticism. They want a controllable global. I'll be very candid, okay? The words that I'm going to use might be very strong. They want something that looked similar to a global slave class for the most part, obedient, not able to control their own destinies, such that only large-scale power structures above nations could be the ones to manage the show. And they're in denial that Ethiopia is not having that, China is not having that, Russia is not having that. Many other countries with the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI is currently, it has 140 member countries who have signed on varying degrees to the framework, who see that this is an alternative, much better orientation for the future. So this is, but the reality is there is a population control agenda underlying a lot of the policies that we see coming out of London and Washington.
And I think, Matt, thank you very much. I mean, it seems like there's a pattern, whether it's tarnishing the image of the country or tarnishing the image of the leader, looking for somebody to replace the leader, sanctions, and then next thing is, economic hardship, such as canceling or threatening to cancel economic programs such as AGOA has happened, and now, I mean, in Ethiopia and all over the world, technically, even in the U.S., inflation rates are very high, and I want you to explain to our audience briefly what inflation means, in in small terms, and also how countries, how a country like Ethiopia is going to be impacted, and what inflation is going to be like, because I think people on the ground are already feeling the effects of all that's happening in Ethiopia, whether it's the conflict and all the other international issues.
Yes. I guess in simple terms, and it's something which is both more complicated than is often discussed, but also it is simple and understandable. When I say oftentimes the idea of inflation is made overly simple, I've seen many so-called experts say that there's only one cause of inflation. It is when, and I don't believe in this, I'm just saying, what they'll say is, this is when central banks print money on behalf of the state to service debts or pay for the overhead maintenance of state obligations. And when you print that money, it is inflationary. Okay, that's not true. That is the most oversimplified, I'd say, a lie. Inflation is simple for those who don't know. This is a cup. I paid $3 for this cup. Let's say in a month, there's just as many cups. The supply of the cups is about equivalent as it is today. The amount of demand of the cups is not that different either. But for whatever reason, this cup all of a sudden is costing $8. It's not more cup that you're getting, but you're paying $8. So the question then becomes, why does this cup, when the supply and the demand are similar, become more expensive? Now, there's two reasons why the cup would become more expensive. Well, number one would be, maybe you've just printed more money in the system, okay? Maybe there's just more money going around, so the actual money in the system has lost its purchasing power, right? Because if, let's say, you've doubled the money supply by just printing like they did in Germany in the 1920s, the value, the ability to buy what you could formerly with that same dollar is now less. So that's one way. But another way that the price could move up is, let's say there was a reduced supply. The amount of production of the cups has diminished, let's say 50-60%. There's less cups that are being produced next month than there were this month. Well, that would also potentially create an increased attention, a strain now, because people still have a demand, so they want to buy the things that are now more rare, and they will pay more for them. Or you could say the cost of production of the cup. Maybe let's say the all of the machinery, the industry that went into, because a cup doesn't come from thin air. I cannot just bring this out of magic, right? There's ceramics, there's the motion of goods, there are industrial machine tools, there is fuel that has to go into the industries that make the machines work, that produce these cups, that then transport them, right? That bring them into a market. So there's all of this hidden process that has money associations to it. Let's say the costs of production increase, so all of a sudden that could also cause the increase of the cup prices. There's a few others. I'm obviously simplifying a little bit.
No, I think that's great. That's great. Thank you.
So in regards to the current crisis of inflation striking, I think, I guess you wanted me to say something about that, right?
Yes, absolutely. About the inflation in the world in general, and in Ethiopia as well.
Okay. Well, I think the big driver currently is the biggest driver, which I'll say something about later, but I've already touched upon it, is the lack of understanding of proper economics. That in healthy economic systems, there is such an understanding as anti-inflationary debt creation, and that's different from inflationary debt creation. So if you just print money, you create a debt without increasing your wealth generation in reality. Like, you don't increase your productivity, you don't uplift people from poverty, you just create money. Let's say it's to bail out some speculators who have gambled with other people's money and they want to be bailed out because they say that they're too big to fail. and you say, okay, let's do that. If you do that, that will be obviously a very inflationary form of debt, okay, that you're creating. An anti-inflationary form of debt would be what you have being created with large-scale mega infrastructure projects. So you create a debt. Let's go for a small scale. If you're a farmer, okay, this works on a small level too. Let's say you're a farmer, you have skills, but you don't have a tractor and you have land. Well, obviously, you might want to take out a debt to buy a tractor, which will increase the production of your land. And at the same time, within maybe 3 or 4 years, because you've improved the land, you've improved the productivity, you have knowledge, but now you can actually use your knowledge because you have equipment, which you did not have. You can now extinguish the debt you took on 3 years earlier. You've created more abundance. In the case of Africa, this is where things like the Grand Renaissance Dam is a very important example of what is a great way of doing, potentially, if it's not sabotaged, anti-inflationary debt creation, or the Belt and Road Initiative. You create a debt that's tied to something that is 10 or 15 or 20 years to build, and it will transform everything along the way and will extinguish itself. The debt will extinguish itself, right? So I'll say that that's the number one thing that's lacking today. But in Europe, we have an energy crisis and a food crisis that are connected. I mean, it's spreading all over North America too. It's spreading all around the world. The energy crisis, in many ways, is a non-crisis that's been artificially created. It's been created by speculators on the one hand. So in the European markets, the way it works for energy prices is that, and this is stupid, this is really dumb, but they do this anyway. The highest energy supplier, the highest cost of energy from whatever supplier anywhere in the European market, sets the cost of everyone else who has to calibrate their prices upwards on speculative markets. So where you got gamblers speculating on what they think the price of a barrel of oil is going to be. And it's really a gambling thing. They just want to make money looking at numbers. They don't care about the oil. They don't care about the people or anything. Even though the cost of production physically might only be $3 or $4 for a barrel of oil, you wonder, how is it going up to $85, $86 a barrel? Where is all of this coming from? And it's largely from speculation. So on the one hand, you have that. So you have already in Europe, we have a 300% or so increase of energy prices. It's going to get bad. Well, it's already bad. It's going to get worse. You have an artificial scarcity being created of energy as well, because on the one hand, nations across Europe have been told to shut down their fossil fuel and even their nuclear plants, which emit zero CO2. Nuclear power emits no CO2, but they've been told, like Germany, to shut it all down and to replace it with the acceptable forms of renewable windmills and solar power energy, which might look okay for a mathematician seeing, this many windmills will create this much, this many gigawatts of power. But the reality of windmill and solar power energy, as we're discovering with the current crisis, especially, is that it's highly unreliable. Sometimes there is no wind and no sun, like in the case of Britain, where the windmills, which take up 25% of the energy supply of Britain, they have fallen to less than 1% efficiency over many extended periods now, resulting in a complete energy deficit. Even their expensive backup generators, which are fossil fuel based, do not have the adequate supplies because they just chose not to invest in the storage facilities for their oil and natural gas. So they chose to create scarcity. It's very expensive already at full capacity. Windmills and solar panel farms only generate about 24% capacity when they're built. So even though you think you're getting 1 gigawatt, you're actually only getting 0.25 gigawatts of energy when they're working well, right? And like I said, even now, they can go as low as 1% or less. So you have that, all that scarcity creates increased prices. And they say it's Russia's fault. Russia is withholding natural gas and oil, is what we're being told in the Western media. And Russia's proven, no, they've only increased their exports from Russia to Europe by 10% over last year. So it's not Russia's fault. But it is this choice to go with very expensive, inefficient forms of green energy sources, primarily wind and solar. And then they're telling the entire world, you all have to do the same as us, even if you're underdeveloped and you desperately need to utilize the coal or fossil fuels that are under your soil, and you desperately need to increase your energy capacity for residents, for both residential and industrial, because these are, they're two different types of energy, but they're both vital. And now I'm thinking about Africa and much of the global south. They're all being told now by billionaires at Davos that no, that's not for you. That was okay for us, but for you, you should probably look out for the environment first. And we'll give you some money to stay poor, but just take the money and put windmills and solar panels over your countries. That'll be better for the environment. And we'll just ignore the people who are going to die en masse and who have been dying en masse. So all of these things increase the prices, the scarcity. And obviously, when the price of energy increases, the cost of production of food, of industrial goods also increases. Like I brought up my example with this cup, all of everything is associated, and people who have little will be able to purchase less than they would have beforehand. More and more of their minimal wealth individually per family is going into just maintaining rent, keeping your family alive. Forget about luxury goods or things that normally would make the engine of the economy function. Forget about that. And so that then also increases and inflames the situation. Now, on top of that, you have nations being sanctioned left and right. You brought up the example of Ethiopia and Mali and Guinea have all been kicked out of the African Growth Opportunities Act. That's hurting directly 1 million Ethiopians who are being badly affected as punishment for not going along with a regime change of their society. But you have Iran, you have Syria, you have Yemen, you have so many countries around the world suffering unilateral sanctions, which again are crushing blows to the world economy and crushing means of paying the debts that have been loaded onto countries over decades. So you have that. And then you also have, they're being left with no other option but to print money. The key for all of this is allow countries to develop real infrastructure the way China is encouraging, with state banks, help Africa build rail, help them build industrial corridors. And the important thing with China, when people say, oh, but China is just like the West, they're just doing a new form of colonialism, just like the West was. And it's like, there's problems, sure, but China, unlike the West, is actually training cadres of Africans to become the engineers, to develop the skill sets that are going to benefit their countries for hundreds of years into the future. The West never permitted, the Western colonial powers never permitted the creation of knowledge within the targeted nations you wish to exploit. They're developing industrial hubs to allow for Africa to develop increasingly manufacturing bases, which is, again, something which we don't do in the West. John F. Kennedy tried. Bobby Kennedy talked about it before he was assassinated in 1968. Franklin Roosevelt tried. McKinley, the other assassinated president in 1901.
Well, let me interrupt you there, Matt. There's a lot of Ethiopians that are educated everywhere around the world. For instance, through whether it's lotteries or scholarships or so forth, both in Europe and the U.S. and so forth. But I don't know if you meant like training in a different purpose.
I don't mean necessarily white collar, like academia type of training, but I mean like the practical engineering skill sets to build things. Like in the West, we have a problem with the consumer society model of the ideas-based economy, where we produce ideas, but we're told we no longer need to have industry. Now, that was a lie. We always needed to have industry to be able to be sovereign, but we lost it all. We today, unfortunately, most of the people who have real knowledge, who used to build our infrastructure, like here in Canada, we stopped building. Our trains are the same technology from the 1950s and 60s as they are today. Nothing improved. Everything stopped in the early 70s. We stopped building. Our infrastructure is 70, 80 years old for our water and electricity systems because we chose to just stop investing in maintaining or improving. So the people who have the knowledge, who used to build things, are in their 80s, 90s, or dead. The new generation of people coming out of universities in the West, don't really tend to have, they're very weak on practical building skills. Unfortunately, it's part of our whole education system was reformed in the 70s and 80s to create people who were more useful for the consumer society services economy. Which, there's a place for services. I'm not trying to say that that's all bad. I'm just
No, I get it. No, I get it. And that's a perfect explanation. Thank you for explaining that. Yeah, thank you. All right. I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to focus on inflation is because, or I want to say cost of living. Cost of living is expensive in Ethiopia. It's expensive and it's getting higher in other parts of the world too. But it's also one of the ways to where you can pressure a government. It's, people might revolt because the cost of living is so high and they can't afford it. Even though this is happening worldwide right now. And then when I look at the statistics of countries with the highest inflation rates, I see that Middle East and other African countries are on top of the list. Is inflation another way of targeting or another way of colonizing or controlling? And how can countries themselves manage this type of inflation so that they can continue to manage their citizens?
You're absolutely correct. And it is a form of economic warfare. People are used to naively thinking about warfare as the physical expression of it, the violent bombs, the shooting. It's really, you could do more damage with a stroke of a pen as an economist at the World Bank than you could with 1,000 soldiers or mercenaries in a country. And this has been known for a long time. This is not a new innovation, right? That's how Britain was able, with 10,000 soldiers. People wonder, how is this small little island able to control so much of the world for over 200 years? India had 400 million people. 400 million people were in India. And yet 10,000 British soldiers alone were able to keep control of the British Empire. How? It wasn't through physical force. It was through these asymmetrical forms of warfare. Economic warfare is key. And so by inducing, for example, what we have with, I mentioned the sanction regime of destroying the nation's ability to stand on its own 2 feet, whether it is in Iran or Yemen or Syria or Ethiopia or anywhere. If you can sanction a country and punish other countries for doing business with the targeted country, it doesn't mean that targeted country has done anything wrong. It just means that they have been unwilling to be destroyed by you. And that was their punishment. So now they're being sanctioned. Well, any country that wants to do business is also going to suffer sanctions. That's why Meng Wanzhou was in prison, practically house arrest, for 3 years in Canada, because Huawei apparently was accused of doing business with an Iranian firm. And that's something that the US government didn't like. And so they were threatening to put her in prison. Made no sense. So the real agenda is that, the use of sanctions is a great way to keep people in the mud, to keep them from standing up on their own 2 feet, because you keep their economy crippled. The confiscation of their wealth, like in the case of Afghanistan, which is suffering terrible inflation. Much of the wealth of the Afghanistan central bank is being locked up by European, German, American banks, which is withholding. It's not allowing the funds to be used by the new Afghan government for the needs of its people, which is, again, you're breaking the kneecaps of somebody. First, you're saying, oh, look, they can't run a race. They can't govern their own society. And then you go and you break their kneecaps. And then when they can't run, you say, oh, look, I told you they can't run the race. They can't govern their society. Look. And then you can spin a lie and blame it on the big bad Taliban, or you could blame it on whatever boogie monster you want to create. Blame it on Bashar al-Assad, blame it on the Ethiopian government now, whatever. Make a boogeyman and then get the media, who is complicit, to then repeat something to create artificial consent in the Western population who has no idea what's going on. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The use of the creation of inflation is completely being managed. It's artificial, and it is being done to destroy intentionally Ethiopia and other countries' ability to develop their own economy. Like every country has the right to have a national bank. You can create a national bank. You can emit bonds that the people can purchase tied to big projects, the way in many ways the Ethiopian government did to fund much of the development of the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. This is what Abraham Lincoln did when he built the Transcontinental Railway in the United States, just to get across the parallels here. This is how the U.S. built itself in the past. And you need China. You need big countries today who are able to wield sufficient political power in defense of the rights of other countries to have autonomy, independence. So it's very good that you have this relationship with Ethiopia and China, and the Belt and Road Initiative increasingly coming online across Africa. That's so important to change the rules of the game, because without that, I don't think the smaller countries could stand much of a chance right now.
Thanks, Matt. I think we're running out of time, but so do you think, as a last question, do you think Ethiopia can withstand the economic challenges that she's facing currently, along with the other challenges, especially seeing exactly how the pattern is going to be? It seems like Ethiopia is going to be squeezed economically. I think she's going to be challenged with inflation. And well, is there a way out? What can she do in about a minute or so?
Well, I've alluded to it, I think, throughout my presentation. I think that Ethiopia has moved through amazing miracles up until now. Through the last years, there's been incredible miracles that Ethiopia has accomplished. It has remained the only country that has never been colonized, as well as my friend Larry Freeman has informed me, and I was so impressed by that. So there's a very strong, deep-seated tradition, which is something that the oligarchy that is trying to manage the world as gods of Olympus today, they don't understand this character. They want to try to quantify everything and treat all human beings like they were malleable animals or machines in a computer model, and they don't see things that are metaphysical, like pride in your past, love of justice, they don't see those things, because you can't put them in a computer that way. But this is something which has allowed Ethiopia to navigate through crazy storms, and I think that they have everything. They've exhibited all of the characteristics of a nation that is fit to survive, that has the creative vitality to do it. And I think that the desperate people in Washington who are trying to manage the insurrectionary movements, they don't understand that. They're working on a mathematical formula that is that has no bearing in reality. So yes, I think Ethiopia is the best pathway to the salvation for all of Africa, and potentially much of humanity is located in the battle that is being waged in Ethiopia currently. Yes.
So the suggestion is to print more money, yeah? More Ethiopian money?
Well, you definitely need to you need capital controls. Like there's certain things that need to be done that involve it's the question of the creation of the type of money, the type of money that's tied to building up industrial hubs and projects with your neighbors, with the help of China and other countries. Like I said, you desperately need the China Import-Export Bank. You need that type of spirit of cooperation to spread. And you need other countries in Africa, I think, increasingly to be inspired to do the same, and stand sort of as a front to say, look, these debts are unpayable. Most of the debts being held on top of the country's heads of much of the world are never going to be paid. It is the cause of the coming breakdown of the financial system internationally. So they should say together, we need to create a debt jubilee. This has to be done, and you need people to stand at the same time and say at the same time, we need a complete reorganization of the debt, a jubilee, and a reissuance of a new type of credit for large scale, like I said, 20, 30, 40-year projects for building infrastructure all over the world, which has a certain characteristic, not the Green New Deal type of infrastructure, but real infrastructure that uplifts people out of poverty and creates more wealth. But you need that type of grand strategy. You have to think on that larger top-down scale. If you're fighting too much in the myopic battles, moment to moment, you can get overwhelmed by the complexity which is what the enemy wants.
Matt Ehret, thank you so much for joining me. It was a wonderful an hour or so. I really appreciate you joining us. I don't think it will be the last time that I will be seeing you. Prime Media audiences, this was my hour with Matt Ehret. Thank you for joining me, and I'll be back with another guest.